Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm Ricardo from the middle of South Africa in the Vrystaat. I think I'm a little bit maybe the comic relief after lunch, so I'm not going to take things too seriously so that we can kind of have conversations as well. So if you want to interject halfway through me saying something, please do. I'm not precious whatsoever, and I'm going to wing it because I've actually kind of deleted 2/3 of my presentation because so much of it has been covered already by other speakers. I just thought I'd kill you if I took you through it again. So basically what we're going to be focusing on is kind of case studies or examples of some of the work, initiatives, programs that we've developed in Bloemfontein at the Vrystaat Kunstefees Arts Festival, Tsa-Botjhaba. Okay, the Vrystaat Arts Festival is an Afrikaans language festival, but it also engages with creative communities, Sesotho and English in particular, but also with other national and international creatives and practitioners. And it takes place in the middle of Bloemfontein, flower fountain city, at the University of the Vrystaat on the campus there, but also in the city itself, in the streets and in the informal settlements outside of Bloemfontein as well. In Bloemfontein, we've recently, over the last 3 years, organised a First Nations laboratory led by First Nations people from Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, and they have kind of over the years gradually given us permission to do particular things. And one of the things that they do each year now is they launch the festival through a First Nation ceremony. And ek dink Piet Berendse is van Namibia. So he came over, as we were talking about regional engagement, he came to kind of help Edward Charles Heman to do the ceremony. And what we also do, in addition to the ceremony, in front of before every public speaking that I do, I acknowledge the First Nations people of the Vrystaat, if I'm in the Vrystaat. I think the First Nation people here in Windhoek is also the Khoisan, but I don't have permission to do that here, but I will just tell you what I say in Bloemfontein when I do a public talk there. So I say in English or Afrikaans usually, but it's also in Kwekwe and in Sesotho. I say the Vrystaat Arts Festival respects and acknowledges the Khoisan of the Vrystaat and the deep spiritual relationship they have with their ancestors, the land and its people. So that's a First Nation acknowledgement that I do before every public speaking. This is one of the works that we did a couple of years ago called It's My City, with British artist Alex Rinsler, but with 3 local artists, the Tiamo Arts and Craft Group, Minay Kleinhans and Marius Jansen van Vieren. And they built these fabulous sculptures in different parts of the city, and then they brought them together in the middle of the city, and then they burned them. And we're just very lucky the city didn't burn down, but we survived. I'll briefly explain the structure of the festival. 4 years ago when I moved back to South Africa from Australia, we did some consultations and people told us there are a lot of opportunities that they kind of saw emerging in South Africa, in Bloemfontein as well. So we asked them what some of those things were that they wanted to see. And through the consultations we realized like a fringe festival would be important because there was a lot of emerging practitioners in the Vrystaat, also a very young population. Public art, literature festival, the program for innovation and art form development, which I'll talk a little bit about later, an arts and education or arts learning program, an arts and health program that I'll talk to you a little bit about as well, and then the Pan-African Creative Exchange, PACE, that Owen talked to you a little bit about yesterday. So after the consultations, we kind of developed our vision, mission, and values. I won't go through them in detail because I can't read them from here. But our mission is one festival. Our vision is one festival, many stories. So even though we're an Afrikaans language festival, we embrace a hell of a lot of other languages and genres and cultures. Difference comes in various forms. It's not just in race, culture, or language. We had about 106, this is last year's statistics, 106 main theatre and music events on the main festival. about 1,039 artists who participate in the festival, about 255,000 people engage with the festival. So it's not necessarily they buy tickets, but because we started doing work in the city, free art, a lot more people managed to experience the festival. We had a lot of free events, an arts market with about 440 stalls, and as you see, a fringe that had at that time about 57 events. I'm not going to go into the details of the statistics, but as you can see, the age, it's quite a young population, a young age group that engages with the festival. Our audience reach has increased since we did the public art work. Our ticket sales have increased kind of incrementally. Our arts markets have increased incrementally. And our sponsorship increased incrementally with project funding, but not with operational funding. And I think this is the thing that many organizations suffer. There's a lot of money for projects, but there's very little money for operational costs. And people, whoever is funding, or whoever is out there giving money to arts organizations, just realize without operational costs, you can throw as much money as you want into projects. There's going to be no one to do them. The main festival, and this is Alpha, which Owen here directed with Steph de Pap, Guy de Lancy, and Bram de Gooi, was with South African presenters, artists, actors, and musicians. This year, it premiered at the Vrystaat Kunstefees. This year was kind of an extraordinary site-specific work. And, radical new things are kind of emerging because people are taking risks and collaborating across cultures and across nations as well. So I think one of the key things I've learned over the last 4 years is not to be too parochial, to kind of embrace others, find a collaborative process and fuse some of the work that you do with other people. You can still do your own work as well, but co-collaboration, in particular in the kind of the technology and emerging funding field that we're kind of in, co-collaboration is essential. Just a few more images from the main festival. You see there's music, visual arts, experimental theatre, a lot of kind of traditional theatre as well, because most of the money that comes into the festival comes from traditional Afrikaans theatre and music. Those are the people that buy tickets. Brown and white Afrikaans-speaking women buy tickets to theatre, Afrikaans theatre, music, and events, and I thank them for that, and bring them on board as ambassadors and go, with your support, we can also support Sesotho, we can also do First Nation projects, we can also do other language initiatives, we can support work that needs cultural development on the periphery of the festival, and then move it slowly into the main of the festival. Again, there's children's theatre as well, and also kind of hard-hitting experimental work in very site-specific places. Then we have the Fringe Festival. And the Fringe Festival we started about 3 years ago, and some things worked and some things didn't work. So whenever you start something, don't worry if some of it is really shitty, because it's okay. You're allowed to do some shitty things, and you're allowed to do some fabulous things. But partykeer gaan dit net kak wees, and there's no other way around it, and you've got to learn from it and move on. And so it didn't work at a particular venue, and so we moved it to this venue. But how would you know unless you tried it? And so since then, I think there was about 25 events for the first Fringe. This year, I think there was something like 60. So the Fringe has also grown exponentially, and the Fringe is a platform. The main festival is curated. So the main festival people put in application, and there's a Kierans committee, and they go through it and they select the work based on the quality of the work. And we also commission some work, as I said. With the Fringe, it's an open platform. As long as you kind of fall within the human rights framework, and you're not going to cuck people out because of race, sexuality, and gender, unless you're critiquing that in a really interesting way, we won't support if you're not going to be working within the human rights framework, that's not going to be supported. But generally, everything else, you just put it in and come and do it. You pay a small fee to use the venues. We rig the venues up, and we give you technical support. You do all the promotion. We try and kind of promote it as much as we can as well, in addition to the main festival. But really, it's kind of radical self-reliance. And some Fringe events do better than the main festival, and some Fringe events fail spectacularly. But as long as they fail spectacularly, like if they just failed like that, then I'd be pissed off. But some of them really failed because they they tried something completely new, but they learned. At least they learned, yeah. And the Fringe also, it's growing because people have creative ideas that we never thought of as festival organisers. So, there are play readings now. I think there was a British author who came and, a playwright, Hassan Mohammed Ali, who read the first reading of his play at the Fringe because he was there as a speaker as well. And we said, let's just kind of do something in the Fringe. There's an open studio tour, there's dance, there's music, there's a whole range of things. Actually, there's a Miss and Mr. Vrystaat Kunstefees also. And I was so skeptical, and I went, but what if transgender people want to apply? They went, yes, bring them on, that we can, they can be wherever they want to be. They can be a Ms. X. No one applied yet, but it's going to happen. And it was one of the most spectacular events there. I went to see it very skeptical, and it was like 400 people, and these wonderful kind of young people talking about themselves. And there was this young girl from Heidedal, from one of the communities in just outside Bloemfontein. And she came in and she had this little red dress on and she walked onto the stage. She was about this high. And she came to the front and she said, "My name is Marjorie. Ek gaan 'n dokter word." And she walked off the stage and was like, yes! So, they're building, that event built a lot of self-esteem for people. We also, suddenly, out of nowhere, over the last 3 years, because the University of the Free State supported us, we have the most engaged and kind of biggest offering, I guess, of international authors for literature in South Africa now. So the Vrystaat Literature Festival is the most internationally kind of linked literature festival in South Africa now. We had about 130 authors this year, about up to 20 of them from overseas. We got a lot of support from the Canada Council, from the French, from the Dutch, from Angola, from Uganda. One of the leaders, the lead kind of writers was Goretti Koyamondi from Uganda, from the African Writers Trust. And so we're building the Pan-African engagement a little bit more there as well. Actually, the interesting thing for us with the Literature Festival is the poetry, because I didn't realize, none of us realized that poetry in the spoken word was so huge in the Free State. And the most Pan-African thing that we have on the festival is the Poetry Slam, because Tutukane Nhlova, who organizes the poetry, who assists with the Literature Festival, is from Zim, but he's got all these contacts in Zambia and the Congo and Lesotho and whatever, and they all just come down by bus. So it's like we don't have to fly people in, they just hop on a bus. We forget. Africa has roads. People don't have to fly. We can drive across the border and come and visit. So again, there's actuality. So it ranges from high literature to kind of really topical conversations around land reform, around family murders. Family murders was a huge thing this year. People loved going to listen how children murdered their families. I'm not sure why, but it was a hot topic. There's some underlying. And then we, of course, have the Panda. It sold out over and over. The Pan-African Creative Exchange, PACE, that Owen talked about yesterday. Nikkei Jonah, who's unfortunately not here, and we're missing her terribly. She's a Nigerian, UK, British Nigerian. She's the executive director of PACE. So she pulled all this together, and her networks from Nigeria and also Senegal and the Gambia. We had a kind of curated program this year between Lagos and Johannesburg, which we presented in Bloemfontein for some of the works that are, in development in Nigeria. So we've got very strong relationships now with Nigeria, but she's thinking of a different form of kind of curated program, perhaps with Senegal or some other kind of cultural hub that might be interested in working with us in bringing some of the best theatre of the Pan-African of Pan-African work to Bloemfontein. And as Owen said yesterday, the Pan-African Exchange is incredibly important to us because Bloemfontein, unbeknownst to us, has some of the best theatre infrastructure on the continent. Within kind of a 10-minute radius, there's about 14 fully equipped theatres. Who would have thought in this little town in the middle of nowhere? Yeah. So that was phenomenal. Bloemfontein even has a library for for plays. So there's a whole library just for plays, for South African playwriting. What PACE did, we brought, well, we didn't brought, it's like the Uber of a marketplace, really. We kind of create the platform and people bring themselves there. And so we had Kwame there from the New Vic in London. We had Peggy from the Lincoln Centre. We had Act 3 from Singapore. We had lots of people from Australia. We had people from France, Europe, whatever. But more importantly, we had people from all over Africa. We had people from Nigeria, from Lesotho, from Namibia, from Botswana, from the Gambia, from Senegal. And they all came to kind of network and see showcases of some of the work in progress. Some of the things were works in progress, some were full works that they just showed excerpts out of. And so it's a very informal networking space, so the pressure isn't on to kind of have a friggin' production, although we had a few friggin' productions like Vuyani Dance Theatre and Sion, which was extraordinary, and the world must see it. And I think the world is going to see it because I think it's off to London thanks to PACE. And all the other works that we showed, like The Little Prince from the Market Theatre, Hani, Womb of Fire, all of them have got gigs in either Amsterdam or in New York or in London, and we kind of want to get those gigs into Africa as well. So that's part of what the Pan-African push is, because people in Nigeria, people in the Gambia, people in Zaire must see Sion. It's extraordinary. They must see work like that. And so, yeah, so PACE, I think, is going to grow into something fabulous. And Erwin wanted to say a little something about PACE, which he forgot to say yesterday.
Sorry to interrupt this, but Rosemary said yesterday, we need to come with some tangible things out of here. And so one thing that I totally forgot because the question was asked and then it threw me off, but we have so many people here from arts councils, from governments, and I know you can't pledge right now because you don't know your budgets for 2 years from now, but if you could put it as a seed in your head that when artists from your countries are being selected by this very prestigious selection committee from all over Africa, from festivals, then you know that those artists are really good. The whole point is we don't want governments to send artists to us. We want to select the artists, artists select artists, and then we need support from the governments to bring them here. PACE, unfortunately, cannot help with flying people to Bloemfontein, but we already spoke on Monday, which was really lovely, with the Africa chapter, where all these national arts councils were together, and I saw the excitement in the room. And it is not just about bringing your artist here, we need you to be there too, to experience it. So that was the thing that I wanted to say, like, if anything comes out of this, this is a platform for Africa. If artists are selected, please help your artist. Or if maybe nobody from your country is selected, you can also send a presenter or a festival director to, not present, sorry, you can promote or support a festival director to come to PACE. Because like we said, now there were already several, but the most presenters that were there were from outside of Africa, looking for work from Africa. The great collaborations that happened was between artists, but if we get more African-based festivals to come as well, or venues to come as well, then those presenters will see work like Sion or like Abdoulaye Diallo, the dancer, and they will say, wow, you should come to our country and present that work there. So that's what I wanted to say. So if all those people that have power in that sense can put that seed in their head that in 2020 artists will knock on your doors to come to Bloemfontein. Thanks.
Alsjeblieft, allemaal welkom. And then the other thing we did, through consultation, we realized that a lot of people couldn't access the festival at all because it was on the university campus. And a lot of people feel really unwelcome on campuses. I'm not sure why. I guess this is kind of this elitist sensibility that's still there, and you are in and you are out, and it's gated and there are fences. So, you know, it doesn't send a good message. But we thought, well, what the hell? There are so many people who want to experience art. Let's take it into a public space. So we developed two initiatives, Public Art Project and Vrystaat. So public art projects presented over the week, during the day, interesting work that people wanted to kind of present in public spaces. And again, it varied from really kind of community-based stuff, just with poetry and dance, to really highly engaged, long-term projects that artists from around the world have been working collaboratively with people in Bloemfontein to present in the city for people. So works such as Air, which you can see at the bottom there, which was a radio transmission book launch in this one costume. So 12 people walked with radios, and the stories were broadcast by radio stations in a relay. So they managed to organize that with the radio stations. And then their bodies became the transmitters, because the costumes had copper in it. So they'd walk through the city, and the stories that they'd collected from people were transmitted through the radio, through their costumes. And some of it was poetry, some of it was narratives. The whole thematic of it was the lost lover, because there are all these crazy posters about getting larger penises and finding your lost lover. So they decided to kind of go with a lost lover and help people to find their lost lovers. I'm glad they didn't go with the other one. And then on Vrystaat as well is a locally based project with run by Zane Miller, who kind of auditions people in the local community, and then they present their work on the festival grounds as well. Because the festival grounds is a very artsy market, so it's kind of food, crafts, and a lot of people think the whole festival is just the arts market. And so we thought, no, it's art itself. So we're trying to kind of infiltrate that as well, and kind of the next step would be for us to kind of have people running around selling tickets to theatre on the festival ground, so that people know that there's theatre and music and other things happening as well. And as I said, the arts and craft market, it is enormous. There's about 440 stalls, really good food, wine, beer, craft, chocolate, soap, whatever you want, it's there. And Nikkei, when we were talking about pace, she mentioned something really interesting, and I thought I'd just mention it now as well. She said, one of the key advantages that Africa has that people in Europe and America have lost is craftsmanship, for people to kind of make things and have the skills to make things. Because she was talking to the Royal Theatre, or one of the people engaged with costume making in Europe, and no one had the skills there to build these beautiful shoes that they needed for this 18th century opera. So I think they got somebody in Nigeria who knew how to make shoes to build these beautiful things for the European market. So with the internet and with bespoke craftsmanship, that people can still afford to be craftsmen in Africa, I think there's potentially a huge market there as well in employing people in the creative industries for international markets and intra-Africa markets. Then the Program for Innovation and Art Form Development was an initiative that we started about 4 years ago as well. A lot of these things started about 4 years ago, so we're now into this 4-year cycle. It's a program that is about interdisciplinary and experimental art, and it challenges us on how we can engage experimental interdisciplinary art with community, or on a community level, so that people who are not always able to access technology or highly contemporary art can get access to it, because it's just ridiculous that people should not have the best and the most interesting art form practices in communities that don't usually have access to it. So the aim behind PIAD is to kind of find ways of engaging community in highly contemporary, exploratory, experimental practice. So there are 6 works, or there's 5 works recently that we did. The top one was the White Horse Parade. It's about this fabulous horse called Tabure, which is a Sesotho horse that was King Moshese's horse. And the Sesotho people believe, he lost his muti, or his magic, at the bottom of the mountain, and then he was killed. And so there's this beautiful image of a white horse on the mountain. And the English people believe it was the White Horse Brigade from the Boer War. The doctors build the horse doctors build the sculpture there, and that's their narrative. And the Afrikaners who live around the hill, the only narrative, and I'm an Afrikaner, I'm ashamed of it sometimes, because all their narrative was that if you kissed kissed on Naval Hill, the horse would step forward. And my cousin, who lived at the bottom of the hill, said, "That horse has been around the world a few times now." Because Naval Hill is a Naval Hill. So there's a few other projects there as well. And then the Open Lab, which happened this year, it's biannual as well. So this is the third one we did. Again, it's an interdisciplinary experimental site-specific laboratory for experimental artists who are selected. About between 10 and 15 every 2 years, they come together for 2 weeks during the festival, and also after the festival, they go to the Northern Cape, to a little town called Richmond, which most of these images are in. And in that 2-week period, they come from different genres and different backgrounds and different languages and cultures, and really what they do in that week is kind of fall apart as artists, in a sense, and reconfigure themselves, because to work collaboratively and to step out of your own art form practice is painful and challenging. And so it's a safe space for them to do that. And so there's no outcomes required from these laboratories. Often laboratories or workshops are very outcome-driven. The only outcome for this is the process. So I've turned kind of the outcome-based narrative into a process narrative. So the product is the process, and it's very important to give artists space to just be and be challenged and tested in new ways with others. Where a dancer works with a musician or a visualizer, they've never worked before, and they come up with something that has never existed before, out of play, not because they have to produce something for somebody. And so some of the work, a year after the lab, we then kind of asked the artists to kind of put together little proposals as well, because sometimes it takes a year or so for some of the ideas that they generated at the lab to gestate. And so some fabulous work have been presented as part of the Open Lab New Work project. And I'm not going to go through all of them there, but a lot of it's very site-specific and kind of challenging, politically challenging, culturally challenging, and also, crosses boundaries that are kind of hard to cross in daily social life, but ask questions that need to be asked if we're ever going to move on and heal as a society. Talking about healing, the other initiative that's also about 3 years old now is Vrystaat Arts and Health. It's a very specific initiative. It is quite complex for us as a festival to host it, because it's a community arts and cultural development initiative that finds new ways of linking health communities and artists. And it's not in kind of the traditional way where, somebody goes in and paints work about HIV. It's about working with a kind of a reference group, number one, from the community, working with that reference group who decides on what it is that is going to be most relevant to that community, and then bringing artists in with the reference group to kind of co-collaboratively develop other communication strategies or kind of new artwork or new ways of presenting issues around arts and health to empower the communities who are in health crises or who may be disadvantaged because they're perceived to be in health crises, to have a voice of their own. So the first one is a Platfontein First Nation project with young people and elders, and the project on the other side is sex talks. So it was a talk about sexuality, LGBTQI realities in South Africa. And I think lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex issues are a huge issue for Africa, because there are very few places in Africa I can go to as a gay man and feel safe. And I think if there's going to be a creative evolution in Africa, that needs to be addressed. We need to have spaces where people can be themselves. Arts and sustainable development is also an incredibly beautiful project. The project is actually called ReFuture. It's a collaboration between Dr. Keith Armstrong from the Queensland University of Technology, the University of the Free State Development Centre, and Kuala Pilangtala, did I say that right? Start Living Green, which is post-natural building project, shack replacement project, where local communities are empowered again to kind of develop housing for themselves in a way that they want to be housed, rather than having to live in shacks, because it gives people dignity again. So there was this one young man who's had a stroke, and then he started working with Keith and Anita, as part of his rehabilitation. So not only did he help rehabilitate himself from his stroke, but he built for himself and his mother this beautiful house made from building material that was kind of around him, bottles, mud, and kind of the material that everybody has. The next phase for this is a 4-year project now. It's probably going to be 10 years, I hope, because I think part of the power of some of these projects is the iterative nature and the long-term nature of this, and for funding bodies to also realise this, that it's actually quite pointless and useless to put money into a project that is just a one-off if you want to have long-term, sustainable engagement. You know, some projects are fabulous if they're just one-off, but if you want real change, you need iterative projects. So the next phase is 3D mapping. So they send drones over these informal settlements. And the most wonderful thing is when people saw how they were living, they lived in cities. You drive past it and it looks like shacks, and you look at it from above and people had, you know, roads and houses and gardens. It was like amazing. So people just seeing how they lived changed their whole perception of themselves already and gave them an incredible sense of pride. And so the next step is doing some 3D mapping, and then people will be able to, through the 3D mapping, change online their kind of shack and see and kind of build a new structure so they can see what it could look like potentially if they started building it. So there's a fabulous kind of opportunity that evolved from something that we had no clue what was going to come out of it. Because we just said, Keith, do you want to come? We're going to kind of embed you as a media artist. He's also an engineer. Embed you as a creative in this development scenario. God knows what's going to come out of it. Are you interested? Come and play. And he went, yes. And then over the last 3 to 4 years, this is what has emerged, because he has just the personality as well to kind of engage with people on a really wonderful human level and to honour everybody and their journey. The other interesting project, 5 minutes, is this project called Disobedience Rules. And I think this is particularly relevant for us in South Africa, but probably more broadly in South Africa as well, in the broader Africa as well. This was by a West Australian group called PVI Collective, and they worked with local performers and transgender activists in the city and on the university campus. And basically they kind of developed this game with the community and community leaders, where they kind of had cards, and the kind of these challenges were written on the cards. And this game evolved about how you can be creatively, civilly disobedient, how you can challenge what is happening in your society without having to burn down the town hall. There are other creative ways of being civilly disobedient. And so this one in particular is what I call a telematic work, so it's computer-mediated projects. So the people there, if you can see it on the far, right? The far right, were on the university campus in this game room where they had dice and they had cards, and so they played the game. And then they were transmitted, live streamed through onto a screen in the middle of the city on Hoffman Plain. And in the city there were these players, these game players on the square. And then the community leaders there would pull a card, and the one card they pulled as an example would be, if there was a gesture that you would make to protest when the national anthem of South Africa is played, what would it be? And so they all, the one community leader kind of just, this gesture. And so it was transmitted to the Hoffman Plain, and then like 50 people on Hoffman Plain, kind of when they saw this and heard this, they started playing the national anthem, and everybody just went. And so it is a very interesting way to kind of engage community in a kind of very sophisticated, extraordinary gameplay talking about civil society. And what is interesting about this is we're working now, fingers crossed, with the Lagos Fringe, because this is a telematic work, and this is what technology can do. Technology is not just a distribution. Technology gives you the potential to co-create using the technology as a medium. So technology is not just about getting the messages out there. Technology is about the stuff. It's like the mud. It's like the clay. Use the technology as your medium. So we could have, for example, Nigerian leaders from the diaspora in West Australia, in Perth, play the game and that being transmitted live to Lagos. And in Lagos, in a public square, there would be players in Lagos working with the community leaders in Perth in real time, creating, a work about civil disobedience or creative play. So just finishing with this one, because we were talking about the creative economies. I think it's very, very important. Although this is the statistical analysis that we did on the economic benefit of the festival last year to the Mangaung region, and it's 208 million, which is extraordinary. For every rand we put in, another 35 rand was generated. So that is just like phenomenal. But that was not our aim. Our aim is to create really interesting art, and I think this is something that we have to remember. The good art, working with artists in a respectful, contemporary, interesting way, is the most important thing. Not the economics. The economics will come. If you develop something interesting, it's like going to church, I think. I'm not religious at all, but this is why I suspect people go to church, because it gives them meaning. And if you create something that's meaningful and people can reflect on their life, why the hell we are alive, what it means to be human, those are the things that interest people. And it's not an economic equation, but it translates into it eventually. But I don't think that is the focus necessarily. And then recommendations. Oh my God, I've got to read it here close. Sorry. I just kind of pulled these recommendations out of my butt over the last couple of days, listening to everybody here and getting some feedback from people. And some of the things that I thought, given the history of our festival and what it is that we do, and it may link into some of the things that you do as well, is to do kind of a SADC First Nation laboratory, because I think First Nation issues are potentially incredibly powerful for us in Southern Africa, in particular with the Khoisan, other First Nations, given the complexity around land and belonging. And I think that would be very powerful. I think we're trying to kind of bring in more Southern African First Nation people. A SADC, or maybe Africa is too big, but maybe a SADC creative industry mapping research. I'm not aware of anything that has taken place. I might be wrong, but I think to kind of map a creative industry ecology for SADC would be extraordinary to have, similar to what you did, I think, for Namibia, because out of that you can develop some really interesting arguments and economic arguments also around what could be useful for Southern Africa. I think what would be incredibly useful would be a SADC or African Festivals Network, where festival directors or managers can come together to kind of share knowledge, and also maybe even bring technical staff and other key festival people as well to kind of share knowledge around what it means to run a festival and how we could share resources across the region, because a lot of that stuff. So we're sending one of our fringe coordinators, Michael Garbett, not one of our fringe coordinators, the only fringe coordinator, Michael Garbett, to Lagos to kind of help Kenneth Uvuvumbu, I think is his surname, to not help, but kind of engage with Kenneth, who's running the first Lagos Fringe there as well, and just to learn from Kenneth how he's doing it there. So there I was thinking also a SADC African Fringe Network, if there's lots of fringe, a SADC or African Literary Fellowship or Writers in Residency Program, because that was a very key thing that came out of our literature festival. People were very keen to have writers in residence across Africa. And the others you can read, but IETM, ISPA, African Centre for Interdisciplinary and Experimental Art, and Pan-African Creative Exchange, I think are incredibly interesting opportunities that we can link in here with SADC. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We can take a seat. Okay, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Oh, thank you for bringing the lights on. Quick questions.
Ricardo, thanks very much for that. I'd like to know, and I'm sure a lot of people here would like to know very briefly, your business model from your first year comparative to how it's shifted and changed in terms of your funding model now.
It's the festival has three forms of income. We get no government funding. So our funding comes from sponsorships and partners. So the University of the Free State, Media 24, so 10 cents that you saw yesterday. Thank you, 10 cents. And the ticket sales, another third. And then the other third is our arts market. So we kind of sell space for the marketplace to be on the university campus. The model has shifted from being kind of more cash for operational costs in the past, with corporations usually just giving cash, to kind of now corporations giving just money for projects, or international funding bodies also giving money for projects. So it's quite complex maintaining the operational aspect of the festival, but I try and kind of work in about 10-15% of any project funding into kind of overheads for operational costs, because otherwise we can't do the project. So most people are quite okay with that. So the funding model has become a little bit more distributed as well. So where the previous festival director did everything, I've given responsibility to like 5 people to do kind of 5 mini festivals. So it's a kind of conglomerate. So maybe it's a different model of a multi-festival event under the one umbrella.
Thank you so much. Let's clap for Dr. Pitch. Thank you for that presentation.